Welcome, and thank you for joining me here at Sleepy Stories. Tonight's collection invites you to drift into the quiet glow of timeless wonder. Fairy tales gathered from the Brothers Grimm, softened and retold for rest. These are stories of loyalty and longing, of vanity and transformation, where animals speak, kings are humbled, and even the smallest act of kindness can change the course of fate. Have you ever wondered what it means to live in rhythm with the natural world, to find magic in promises kept and comfort in lives touched by the extraordinary? If you enjoy stories that help you unwind, don't forget to subscribe, and let us share in these sleepy journeys together each week. Now let us begin. Tonight, let us settle into the soft hush of the woods and drift into the timeless tale of Snow White and Rose Red, a gentle story of sisterhood, kindness, and quiet magic, blooming like roses. Once, at the edge of an old forest, far from roads and towns, there stood a cottage with a red-tiled roof and whitewashed walls, half covered in rose vines. In the warm months, the blossoms spilled across the windows like ribbons. White roses on one side, red roses on the other. Inside this cottage lived a kind widow and her 2 daughters. The girls were as close as sisters could be, yet different in quiet, beautiful ways. The elder daughter had hair dark as a raven's wing and eyes like soft river stone. She was steady, gentle, and thoughtful, the kind of girl who knelt to listen to beetles crawling through the moss. Her name was Snow White. The younger was fair-haired, with cheeks kissed by wind and laughter that sparkled like rain on a tin roof. She was playful, spirited, and curious, the kind who followed fox tracks into the woods just to see where they led. Her name was Rose Red. They had no need for riches. The cottage was small, but it was filled with peace. The fire crackled each night with dry pine wood, and the smell of herbs hung in the air from bundles tied along the rafters. A kettle always hummed gently on the hearth, and the floorboards creaked with a sort of friendly memory beneath their bare feet. The mother was quiet but wise, her hands skilled in mending and her eyes soft with understanding. She let her daughters wander the edge of the woods, but taught them to always return by dusk, for the forest was old and not all its stories were meant for the night. Each morning the girls tended the garden. Snow White harvested root vegetables, her apron dusted with soil and rosemary. Rose Red gathered berries, her arms scratched sweetly by brambles. When their work was done, they read beside the hearth or embroidered in the light that poured through the rose-framed windows. Animals often visited. A shy deer would step softly to the edge of the path. Squirrels chattered from the rooftop. Birds sang at the kitchen window. The girls knew each one by its sounds and habits, as though the forest had folded them into its breath. And so, the seasons passed in a kind of hush. Spring brought wildflowers to the meadows. Summer made the forest sing with cicadas. Autumn painted the trees in gold and rust. And in winter, the snow turned the world to silence, save for the snap of the fire and the whisper of wind around the chimney. But it was one quiet winter night, when snow dusted the windowsills and the fire burned low, that something changed. Outside, the world was hushed in white. Inside, the 3 sat close to the hearth, working by candlelight. The kettle sang gently. The girls stitched small bundles of dried lavender into cloth sachets to tuck into the linen chest. Then there was a knock at the door, not a loud one, just 3 soft thumps. The girls froze. Their mother looked up calmly and said, "Do not be afraid. This is a kind house. Let us see who seeks warmth tonight." Snow White rose and went to the door. What she found would begin the unfolding of a tale no one could have guessed. A tale of bears and dwarfs, of lost treasures and found hearts, and above all, the quiet magic of kindness. But for now the fire still crackled, and the rose vines swayed gently against the glass, and the night, like the story, had only just begun. Snow White opened the door with care, her fingers curled gently around the wooden latch. A rush of cold air slipped into the warm cottage, curling around her ankles. Standing just outside, half shrouded in falling snow, was a bear, a great one, thick-furred, dark as the bark of the old trees, with snow clinging to his back and paws. His breath rose in soft clouds around him, and his eyes were not wild. They were wide and quiet, like the forest in winter, watchful but not unkind. The girls gasped in unison. Rose Red stepped behind her sister, peeking out with curiosity more than fear. The bear gave a soft, low rumble, not a growl, more like a question. "I mean no harm," the bear said. The words were deep and slow, as though shaped by wind and moss. Their mother stepped forward. "Do you seek shelter?" The bear bowed his shaggy head. "Only from the cold. I have wandered far. My cave is frozen over, and I smelled warmth here." The mother glanced at her daughters, then nodded. "Come in then, but mind the hearth, it's small." And so the bear stepped carefully into the little cottage. Snow melted from his coat and pooled gently at the doorway. He shook once, sending a fine mist of snowflakes into the air. The girls giggled despite themselves, and the bear gave a sound that might have been a laugh. A space was cleared beside the hearth. A blanket was laid down. The bear settled with a contented sigh, his great paws tucked neatly beneath him. "Would you like some tea?" Rose Red asked shyly. "If you don't mind," the bear replied. So tea was poured, 3 mugs and 1 large bowl for their guest. The fire cracked and hissed as snow melted from his fur, releasing the scent of pine and cold earth. That night they spoke gently by the fire. The bear told them of the woods in winter, of sleeping foxes and whispering owls, of frozen rivers and trees that creaked like ships at sea. He told stories of stars he'd watched from the tops of hills, and how the snow sometimes sang when no one else was near. The girls listened, wide-eyed and warm, beneath their quilts. Their mother watched with a small, knowing smile. When it was time to sleep, the bear curled near the fire, breathing slow and deep. The girls tucked in, their room just off the main hearth. "I like him," whispered Rose Red. "He smells like pine cones," Snow White whispered back. Outside, the wind brushed the cottage like a lullaby, and within, a new chapter of their quiet lives had begun, not with fear, but with wonder. The days that followed were wrapped in snow and slow time. The bear stayed. He became part of the rhythm of the house, as if he had always been there. Each morning the girls would wake to find him curled near the hearth, his breath steady, a soft blanket of warmth woven into the cold room. Snow White and Rose Red took to brushing the snow from his coat each evening, giggling when he grumbled in pleasure. Sometimes he would stretch out a heavy paw and let them braid wildflowers into the fur between his ears, even if they quickly wilted in the heat of the cottage. At first, the villagers raised their brows, a bear living with a family. But when no harm came, and the girls returned to the market with cheeks flushed from warmth and laughter, the whispers quieted. "He keeps to himself," the widow would say gently, her voice calm, "and he keeps the wolves away." It was true. Since his arrival, no fox had stolen hens, no shadow had crept near the windows at night. The cottage felt safer, as if the forest itself had bowed slightly closer in protection. Each evening, the girls and their mother sat near the fire. The bear would lie beside them, his eyes half closed, his ear twitching at the sound of the tea kettle. They told him stories, not just fairy tales, but the simple ones too, of garden chores and lost mittens, of Rose Red's dream about dancing raccoons, of Snow White's worry that the bread had risen too much. And in return, the bear would speak, slowly, thoughtfully, like the forest itself was forming the words. He spoke of moss-covered paths that only opened after snowfall, of stones that hummed if you sat beside them long enough, of deep places in the woods where deer sang in their sleep. Sometimes he fell quiet and stared into the fire. Other times he would sigh as if remembering something beautiful and long ago. On the coldest night of the season, Rose Red asked, "Do you have a name?" The bear looked at her for a long moment. "I did," he said finally, "but I have not heard it spoken in many winters." Snow White placed a gentle hand on his paw. "Would you like us to give you one?" He blinked slowly. "Perhaps, but not yet." So they simply called him Bear, and Bear stayed through the winter. When storms howled, he was calm. When pipes froze and the water had to be carried in buckets from the well, he helped by carrying firewood in his mouth. He never asked for more than a warm place to sleep, and a bowl of tea if there was some to spare. One morning in late February, the snow began to melt. Rose Red pressed her face to the window. "The frost is weeping," she whispered. The world outside was changing. Icicles dripped. The trees stood bare and hopeful. The birds returned, first one, then another. And the bear grew restless. He paced in the evening, stared at the door. One night he stood for a long time looking out into the forest, then turned to them and said, "Soon I must go." Rose Red ran to him. "But spring is still far." He looked down at her. "There are things I must do before the snow is gone." Snow White's voice was quiet. "Will you come back?" The bear dipped his head. "If I can." He left the next morning before dawn while the world still slept. They awoke to find his spot by the hearth cold, his great paw prints pressed into the soft, thawing earth outside the door. The cottage felt different without him, not empty, but quieter. Yet the sisters knew this was not the end of the story. The days grew longer, snow gave way to mist, and then to soft grass pushing up through the thawed earth. Buds appeared on branches, and the air turned sweet with the promise of spring. The sisters missed the bear, though they rarely said so aloud. His absence was felt in the stillness near the hearth, in the extra bowl left untouched, in the long walks that no longer had heavy paw prints beside their boot prints. But time moved gently forward. One morning, Snow White and Rose Red set out into the forest with woven baskets. They wore light cloaks, and the sun streamed through the canopy in quiet ribbons. Birds darted between branches, and the soft drip of melting snow sang like distant chimes. They gathered herbs and early blossoms, laughing when they slipped in the damp leaves. The woods, once sleeping, had woken. As they neared a brook lined with mossy stones, they heard a strange sound, not bird song, not wind, a high, irritated voice. "Let go, you silly stream, you nasty waterlogged thing! Let me be—" The girls exchanged glances, then hurried forward. There, beside the water, stood the smallest man either of them had ever seen, no taller than their knees, with a long white beard that trailed several feet behind him. His cloak was finely stitched but soaked, and his beard, tangled in the roots of a fallen tree, was trapped beneath a rushing stream of water. He tugged furiously, sputtering and muttering. "Oh dear," said Snow White. "Do you need help?" asked Rose Red. The man whirled around. "Help! Of course I need help. Are you blind? But be gentle. Do not tear my beard, for I value it more than gold." The sisters knelt in the mud and worked carefully. Rose Red held back the branches while Snow White loosened the snarl with gentle fingers. At last the beard came free. The man leapt up and scowled. "What took you so long? You oafs nearly ruined it. And look at my cloak, soaked. You think I have spare silk just lying about?" Before they could respond, he snatched a tiny satchel from the bushes and scurried off, vanishing between the trees like a squirrel. The sisters blinked. "Well," said Snow White, "he was "Interesting," said Rose Red. They laughed and returned to their baskets. But it would not be the last time they met the little man. A few days later they found him again, this time caught in a thicket where his beard had tangled in thorns. Another time his cloak snagged on a fishing hook, and once, rather ridiculously, he'd fallen into a jar while reaching for honey and couldn't get out. Each time the sisters helped him. Each time he grumbled and scolded them. And each time they walked away smiling, amused by his prickly pride and tiny stomping feet. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Rose Red said, "I wonder who he is. He seems like he's hiding something." "Perhaps he's just lonely," Snow White said gently. "Some people cover sorrow with thorns." Their mother, spinning by candlelight, added quietly, "Be kind, even to the rude. The forest hears everything." And so the sisters continued to help the little man whenever they found him, always with care, always with patience. For though he was unpleasant, there was something else in his eyes, something old, something secret, and secrets, like spring buds, often bloom when you least expect them. Spring deepened, the forest glowed with new green, and the girls' baskets grew heavy with wild herbs, tender roots, and soft-coloured blossoms. Bees hummed and light danced in puddles left by spring rains. And still the sisters crossed paths with the strange little man. He always seemed to be in trouble, caught in a tree hollow, trapped in brambles, even once cornered by a hungry fox. Each time Snow White and Rose Red rescued him. Each time he offered no thanks. One day they stumbled upon him in a small clearing where sun streamed through the trees. He didn't see them at first. He was bent over a leather pouch, pouring its contents onto a mossy stone. Gold, bright, glowing coins. Dozens of them, maybe more. They spilled across the rock like sunlight turned solid. The sisters stepped closer quietly. The man turned suddenly and gasped. "You!" he squeaked. "What are you doing sneaking around like little foxes?" "We didn't mean to startle you," Snow White said gently. Rose Red tilted her head. "Where did you get all that gold?" The man clutched the pouch to his chest. "None of your business. It's mine, every coin." His eyes flicked nervously to the shadows of the trees. "You shouldn't wander with it out in the open," said Snow White, "especially if you keep getting stuck in places," added Rose Red with a smile. The man grumbled, gathered the coins hastily, and vanished into the woods without another word. That night the sisters couldn't stop thinking about the golden coins. "I wonder where he found it," Rose Red whispered. "He never looks like he's been mining or trading." "He acts as if he's guarding a secret," Snow White murmured, "but a heavy one." The next day they walked deeper into the forest than usual. The paths narrowed and bird calls grew softer. Eventually they came upon the little man again. This time it wasn't a fox or a bush that troubled him, it was a great eagle. The bird had swooped down, likely drawn by the glint of gold, and was now lifting the man by the back of his cloak. He kicked and shouted, "Let me down, you feathered thief! How dare you!" The sisters acted without thinking. Rose Red clapped her hands and waved her shawl, while Snow White threw a handful of loose moss into the air. Startled, the eagle released its grip and soared upward. The man dropped into a bed of ferns, sputtering. "You again," he huffed, brushing off bits of leaf. "Can't a fellow be left alone?" "You were nearly flown away," Rose Red pointed out. "I had it under control," he snapped. Snow White eyed the pack slung over his shoulder. It clinked as he moved. "If we didn't know better," she said kindly, "we'd think you were guarding treasure that doesn't belong to you." The man stiffened. "Mind your manners," he barked, "and your business." Then he stormed off, leaving a trail of gold dust behind him, glinting in the sunlight like breadcrumbs. That evening, as the sisters sat by the fire, their mother listened to their tale with quiet eyes. "Greed," she said gently. grows heavy when carried too long, and secrets guard themselves poorly when fear walks beside them. The girls nodded, thoughtful. The forest was full of mysteries, some wrapped in petals, some in fur, and some in the rustle of gold hidden under leaves. And sometimes kindness could stir what nothing else could. Summer had begun to stir. The trees wore full green coats, and wildflowers swayed lazily in the meadows. The sun lingered longer in the sky, painting the edges of the forest with gold. The air was thick with bees and the hush of ripening fruit. The sisters still spoke, sometimes of the little man and his strange fortune, but the season had softened their curiosity. They spent their days tending the garden, gathering herbs and walking in the quiet woods. Then one evening, just as the sky turned lavender and the wind grew still, they heard a familiar sound. A low rumbling breath, a careful tread. The bear had returned. He stood at the edge of the clearing, just outside the garden gate, his coat brushed with dust and wild leaves, his eyes tired but gentle. "Bear!" cried Rose Red. Snow White ran to him and placed her hand against his shoulder. "You came back." He lowered his head, and for a moment the girls thought he might weep, if bears could do such a thing. "I have come to say goodbye," he said softly. The girls looked at him puzzled. "I must journey farther still," the bear continued. "The curse that binds me has nearly reached its end. But there is one final task, and I fear I must face it soon." They walked with him to the hearth, where he settled once more beside the fire. There, under candlelight, he told them the truth. He was not simply a bear, but a man, a prince once tricked by greed and betrayal. It was the little man, the one with the long white beard, who had cursed him, twisting his form and stealing his gold, binding him to the forest until the spell could be undone. "But kindness has power," he said, "and your hearts, so open, so brave, have broken the thorns that once held me captive." The sisters sat in stunned silence. Then Rose Red, ever bold, asked, "What must you do?" "I must face him," the bear said, "and take back what was stolen." The next day the girls accompanied him into the deep forest, where trees grew thick and silence clung like fog. They found the little man crouched near a tree stump, counting gold coins into a pile. When he saw them, his face twisted. "You!" he shrieked. "You're ruining everything. You meddling girls and your ridiculous bear." The bear stepped forward. "I am no longer yours to twist." The man raised his hand as if to curse them again. But the moment he did, a wind rushed through the trees. The gold scattered. Light burst across the clearing, and where the bear had stood, now stood a man, tall, steady, with eyes full of both sorrow and grace, the prince. The little man vanished in a gust of wind, his curse broken. For a long moment there was only stillness. Then the prince turned to the sisters. "Thank you," he said, "for your warmth, for your courage, and for seeing me, even when I was something else." They smiled, tears bright in their eyes. He returned with them to the cottage. Their mother welcomed him with quiet understanding, as though she had always known. In time he invited them to his kingdom, a place blooming again after years of stillness. And though they were offered riches, Snow White and Rose Red remained unchanged, tending gardens, telling stories, and walking often beneath trees that remembered them. And sometimes, when the wind passed gently through the forest, a soft growl of laughter could be heard, a reminder of the bear who had found his name again. And now, let's ease into our next sleepy tale, The Frog King, or Iron Henry, a quiet story of promises kept, of unexpected transformations, and of the steadfast heart of one who never gave up hope. Once, in a time so distant it feels like a dream, there lived a young princess who loved the quiet things of the world. cool stone fountains, green garden paths, and most of all, her golden ball. The ball was no ordinary toy. It was perfectly round and warm in the sunlight, polished so brightly that it mirrored the sky. She played with it every morning near the deep well that stood at the edge of the palace garden. She would toss the ball high into the air, catching it again with a graceful ease. The sound of it landing in her palms echoed gently through the trees. The birds watched her from the branches above, and sometimes the wind would catch her laughter and carry it far beyond the walls. One afternoon the sky was a soft shade of blue and the leaves barely stirred. The princess sat at the well's edge, tossing her golden ball a little higher than usual. Up, 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 then down. But this time the ball slipped between her fingers. It struck the stones, bounced once and fell, plop, into the deep dark water below. She gasped. She leaned over the edge of the well, but the water only reflected the soft clouds above. The ball was gone, lost in the stillness. Tears gathered in her eyes. It had been a gift from her mother, her favourite treasure. She sat on the mossy ground, hands in her lap, the corners of her mouth trembling. Then through her tears she heard a voice, not stern or frightening, just curious, gentle, rough around the edges. "Why do you cry so, princess?" She looked up, startled. There, sitting on the edge of the well, was a frog. His skin was green and glistening. His eyes were wide and kind. He blinked slowly as though he had all the time in the world. "A creature like you would not understand," she said, wiping her cheek. "My golden ball has fallen into the water." The frog tilted his head. "Perhaps I do understand. But tell me, what would you give in return if I were to fetch it for you?" The princess blinked. "Anything," she said quickly. "My pearls, my jewels, even my crown, if you like." The frog chuckled, a sound like water splashing in a quiet stream. "I have no use for such things, but if you would promise to be my companion, to let me sit beside you, eat from your plate, and rest near your pillow, then I shall bring it back." The princess hesitated. A frog sitting at her table, sleeping on her pillow. It was a silly thought, but she wanted her ball. "Yes," she said, "of course, I promise." The frog nodded, then slipped beneath the surface of the water with barely a ripple. Moments passed, then a soft splash, and there, glimmering in the frog's mouth, was her golden ball. He placed it carefully on the grass beside her. The princess beamed. "Thank you," she cried, scooping it up. "Thank you." And before the frog could speak again, she turned and ran back toward the palace, her laughter trailing behind her like the flutter of a ribbon in the wind. The frog remained at the well, blinking slowly. "Wait," he said softly. "You made a promise," but she was already gone. The garden fell silent. Only the gentle drip of water echoed from the well. Evening settled over the kingdom like a velvet blanket. In the great stone halls of the castle, candles flickered against old walls, casting soft pools of golden light. Outside, the wind quieted, and stars slowly gathered above the towers. The princess dined with her father the king and a few members of the court. The meal was calm and pleasant, filled with the gentle sound of silver against porcelain, the hush of soft voices. Beneath the table, hidden in her lap, the princess held her golden ball. She had said nothing of the frog. She had thought of him only briefly, a strange moment by the water, already fading like a dream. But then, a sound. Not the grand chime of the palace bell, not the call of a herald, just a small, steady knock, soft but clear. Tap, tap, tap. A servant paused, blinking. He leaned toward the great door, listening. The knocking came again. When he opened it, his voice was uncertain. "Your Majesty, there's a frog." The court chuckled politely, thinking it a jest. But the servant stepped aside, and in hopped the frog. His green skin was damp and dappled, his movement careful, yet assured. He looked up at the long table and said quite clearly, "Princess, I have come, as you promised, to sit beside you, to eat from your plate, to rest near your pillow." The dining hall fell silent. The king looked to his daughter, his brow raised with curiosity. "Did you promise this frog such things?" he asked gently. The princess blushed. "Yes, but I didn't think he'd follow me." The king's eyes were calm but kind. A royal promise must be kept, even to a humble creature, especially then. Reluctantly, the princess nodded. A seat was made for the frog beside her, a small velvet cushion placed upon the bench. A silver plate was fetched. A few bits of bread and roasted vegetables were gently arranged. The frog ate slowly and neatly, saying little. The princess watched him from the corner of her eye, unsure what to make of it all. He did not seem smug or foolish. He did not croak or fidget. He simply sat there, as if he belonged. When the meal ended, the king rose from the table. The frog looked to the princess once more. "You promised I might rest near your pillow," he said quietly. The princess stiffened. She had imagined this would be over quickly. A returned ball, a forgotten favour. But the frog remembered, and her father watched with calm expectation. And so, with careful hands, she lifted him and carried him through the long, quiet halls. Candlelight danced on the stone walls. The moon watched from above. In her room, she placed a soft cloth beside her bed and set him gently down. He said nothing more, and as she lay beneath her quilt, staring at the ceiling, the night folded softly around them both. The frog breathed slowly, rhythmically, like the hush of water in a forest stream, and the princess, despite her unease, felt sleep begin to gather in the corners of her mind. Somewhere outside, a breeze stirred the garden roses, and the golden ball rested quietly on the windowsill. The castle lay deep in sleep. Candles had been snuffed. The corridors, once alive with footfalls and laughter, now echoed only with silence. Outside, the moon cast pale light across the gardens, and inside the princess's chamber all was still, except for her thoughts. She lay beneath her quilt, eyes open, staring at the carved beams of the ceiling. The soft rise and fall of the frog's breath, slow, steady, was the only sound in the room besides her own. He had asked for nothing more, no conversation, no demands, just a quiet corner of her world, honoured only because she had promised it. And yet it was strange. She turned on her side, watching him. He rested on the folded cloth, his small limbs tucked beneath him, eyes closed. In sleep, he looked softer, less unusual, more like part of the world around him, like moss on stone or a smooth pebble beside a stream. She didn't understand why he had come, or what he truly wanted, but something about his quiet presence no longer unsettled her. Perhaps she'd misjudged him. Perhaps promises, even odd ones, held meaning worth respecting. With a slow breath, she closed her eyes, and sleep finally claimed her, gentle and deep. She woke in the hush before dawn. Something in the air had shifted. The room felt warmer, as if spring had crept in during the night. And beside her bed, the frog was gone. In his place stood someone else, a young man, tall, quiet and unfamiliar, with eyes the colour of deep water and hair touched by gold. He wore a simple cloak, dusted with forest leaves, and though he stood still, there was something about him that felt steady, like earth, like time. The princess sat up, startled, but the young man gave a slight bow, and his voice was as gentle as the frog's had been. "You have freed me," he said. "Your kindness and the promise you kept, even when you didn't understand, has broken the spell I have lived under for many years." She blinked. You were the frog." He nodded once. "Long ago, I was cursed by someone I once trusted, only through the sincere kindness of another, a promise kept without reward. Could the spell be undone?" She stared at him. "I didn't do it perfectly." "No," he said, smiling softly, "but you did it truthfully, and that matters more. A hush filled the room, not heavy but sacred, like the silence after snowfall. Then came a gentle knock. A servant stood at the door with word from the gates. A carriage had arrived. Inside it waited a man named Henry. The princess frowned. "Do you know him?" The young man's eyes softened. "Yes, he was my closest friend and my most loyal servant. He placed iron bands around his heart to keep it from breaking when I disappeared. He thought he had lost me forever." The princess followed him to the courtyard. There stood a fine carriage, its wood polished and gleaming, its wheels still damp with morning dew, and beside it stood a man, older, proud, and trembling with quiet joy. "My prince," whispered Henry, as tears slipped down his face. "Is it truly you?" The prince embraced him, and in that moment the first iron band across Henry's chest snapped with a sound like soft thunder. Then another and another, until his heart, long held in grief, beat freely once more. That evening, the prince invited the princess to visit his home, a kingdom not far from her own, filled with green hills, slow rivers, and a people who had waited quietly for their prince's return. She agreed, not because of his title, but because she had seen him first, when he was small and strange, and had offered him, however clumsily, her word, and he had never forgotten it. The journey to the prince's kingdom was not a loud one. There were no parades, no trumpets, no crowds at the gates. Only the steady sound of carriage wheels on old cobblestone roads, the hush of wind in the trees, and the quiet breathing of those who no longer had to wait. Henry drove the carriage himself. Though others had offered, he insisted. His hands, weathered and strong, held the reins with care, as if each mile returned something he thought long lost. Inside, the prince and the princess sat side by side. They spoke little, but there was no need for many words. She glanced at him sometimes. This man who had once been a frog, who had spoken kindly when he had every reason not to, who had waited in patience rather than demand. And in her heart she felt no fear, only quiet wonder. The prince too was changed, not just in form but in spirit, no longer cursed, no longer hidden. He moved with stillness and warmth, like someone who had come through long winters and found spring waiting. As the carriage crested the last hill before his homeland, Henry slowed the horses. Below them lay the kingdom. It was smaller than hers, but full of charm. Soft hills, winding rivers, cottages with smoke curling from chimneys, and fields where flowers had already begun to bloom. The prince breathed deeply. "It hasn't changed." Henry looked back. "It has," he said gently, "but it has waited well." As they passed through the village, people stepped from their homes. No one shouted, no one ran, but eyes widened, hands clasped over hearts. Children watched from behind mothers' skirts, and slowly, one by one, they began to smile. By the time they reached the castle, ivy-covered and time softened, the gates opened without a word. Home. That night there was a quiet gathering in the great hall. Candles flickered in every window. The long tables were filled with warm bread, simple soups, and the laughter of familiar voices. No speeches, no titles, just shared peace. The princess sat beside Henry near the fire. He had changed his coat but kept one of the broken iron bands tucked in his pocket, a quiet reminder of the bond he had never let go. She looked to the prince across the room, who was speaking softly with an old gardener. And as she watched him laugh, the sound low and rare, like water in deep wells, she smiled. Because this story, though small, had meant something. It had begun with a ball lost in the water. It had passed through promises made and nearly forgotten. It had moved through fear, patience, and transformation. And it had ended, not with riches or grandeur, but with the gentle return of what had once been lost. Trust, hope, and love that asked for nothing in return. As we leave behind the quiet magic of the Frog King or Iron Henry, a tale of promises kept and hearts set free, let us wander into a new story, one that begins with silence in a royal garden and the shimmer of a golden wing beneath the moonlight. We wander into a new story, one that begins with silence in a royal garden and the shimmer of a golden wing beneath the moonlight. We begin The Golden Bird, a gentle tale of wonder, longing, and the journey toward what truly matters. In a faraway kingdom, tucked between silver rivers and sunlit hills, there was once a king who took great pride in his garden. It was no ordinary place. The orchard trees were older than the castle itself, and their fruit was said to carry healing warmth. Apples of deep gold hung among the leaves, glowing softly, as though kissed by sunlight even in the quiet of dusk. The king would walk among them each morning, hands clasped behind his back, breathing the perfume of blossoms, the hush of petals drifting to earth. The trees gave generously, and so he gave back, with care, with pruning, with whispered thanks. But one season, something changed. Each morning, when the gardeners arrived, one golden apple was missing, only one, taken in the night, plucked with care, no signs of struggle, no fallen branches, no footprints in the dew. The king was baffled and troubled. He ordered his guards to watch the orchard closely. They hid behind hedges and under the shadow of trees, but each morning still, one apple gone. No sound, no thief, only the gentle rustle of leaves in the early wind. Then one night, the king's eldest son, brave, proud, and always eager to prove himself, offered to keep watch. He stood beneath the largest tree, wrapped in a dark cloak, hand resting on the hilt of his sword. But as the hours passed and the moon climbed higher, his eyes grew heavy. The wind was soft. The scent of apples was sweet. Sleep came for him like fog rolling over the hills. And by morning the apple was gone again. The second night the middle son tried. He too was certain he would succeed. He brought a lantern and leaned against the tree, staring up into its branches. But the silence was thick, and silence when long enough can lull even the sharpest mind to rest. He too slept, and again the morning sun revealed one apple missing. By now the king's brow was deeply furrowed. The third and youngest son, often overlooked, quiet in nature, asked if he might try. The king hesitated, but something in the boy's voice was steady, and so that evening he took his place beneath the golden branches. He did not pace, he did not carry a sword. He simply sat with his back against the tree, eyes open to the stars, breath slow and even. He listened to the crickets, to the wind, to the silence between them. And when the hour was deep and the world hushed as if it too had fallen asleep, he saw it, a shimmer, a glint like flame floating through the orchard, then a shape, a bird, feathers bright as molten gold, wings silent as silk, eyes shining with a clever, searching light. The boy held his breath. The bird fluttered closer, landing gently on a low branch. It reached out its beak toward the nearest apple. The boy moved, just enough, quick but not harsh, and he caught a single feather as it slipped loose from the bird's wing, just before it vanished into the dark sky once more. He held it in his hand, warm, luminous, as though it still lived. And in that quiet orchard beneath the golden tree, the youngest son knew this was no ordinary thief. This was the beginning of something greater, a quest, a calling, a path that would wind far beyond the garden gate and into the heart of what it means to truly seek something beautiful. Dawn crept into the orchard, quiet and gold-tinged. The youngest son stood before the king, holding the feather in both hands. It shimmered in the morning light, not gaudy but glowing from within, like sunlight held still. The king leaned forward, eyes wide. "I have never seen such a thing," he whispered. "And you say this bird came in silence?" The boy nodded. "It took the apple gently," he said, as if it needed it, not just wanted it. The king's voice softened. Then it must be found, a bird of such beauty. Perhaps it carries more than golden feathers. Perhaps it holds an answer. And so he called his sons. One by one they came, the eldest tall and certain, the middle one cautious but proud, and the youngest, quiet as ever, stood just behind them. "I will send you to find this bird," the king said. "Whoever brings it back shall be rewarded beyond measure." The eldest son stepped forward first. "I'll have it caged and back before the next moon," he boasted. He took a fine horse, heavy boots, and a sword polished like glass. The second son followed, eyes narrowed. "I'll follow a different path, one with less noise and fewer chances to fail." He took maps, coin, and sharp words. The youngest waited until both had gone. Then he approached his father, asking only for a simple cloak, a satchel of bread, and permission to travel alone. The king looked at him a long while. "You have no horse," he said. "I have time," the boy replied, and with a nod he set off, through the garden gate, down the dew-covered path, and into the wide, quiet world. The road led through fields of golden wheat and into forests where moss muffled every step. The boy walked gently, listening as he had in the orchard, to the wind, the branches, the world as it moved softly around him. One evening, as dusk settled, he came to the edge of a great wood. There stood a fox, lean and russet, its eyes like amber in the fading light. The fox didn't run. Instead, it tilted its head and spoke, not sharply, but with the low, thoughtful rhythm of one who has seen many things. "Where are you going, boy with quiet feet?" The boy was not startled. He bowed slightly, as one does to an elder. "I seek the golden bird." The fox studied him. "Many seek it," he said, "but few listen to more than their own wants." "I only wish to understand why it came," the boy replied, "and where it belongs." The fox blinked slowly. "Then hear this. Take the path through the thorns, not the one paved smooth. Avoid the inn with music, and rest where the trees lean low. Trust not the loudest voice, but the one that waits to be heard." The boy nodded. The fox gave a soft chuff, almost a sigh, and turned. "If your heart remains steady," he added, "we may meet again." And then he was gone. The boy walked on. He passed a fork in the road, one side cobbled and bright, the other overgrown with vines and wildflowers. He chose the latter. He passed a tavern lit with laughter and song, and instead rested beside a willow tree, its branches swaying like lullabies. Each choice was quiet, simple, but made with care, and as the stars unfolded above him that night, he dreamed not of gold, but of wings, silent and glowing, moving through the night as softly as a promise kept. The morning arrived with soft grey skies and the scent of pine. Birds stirred in the branches above, and the young prince rose quietly from beneath the willow where he'd slept, brushing dew from his cloak. The forest had thinned overnight, and now a clearing opened before him, gentle hills rolling out like a crumpled blanket. And there, nestled in the distance, was a low stone wall and the shimmer of something bright beyond it. As he neared, he saw a garden, quiet and strangely empty, and in the centre of it an open courtyard with a single pedestal. Atop it sat a bird cage. It was no ordinary cage. It shimmered like polished moonlight, made of silver so fine it looked like spun thread. Every bar curved and danced in delicate patterns as though shaped by wind rather than hand. And inside, perched calmly, was the golden bird, the very same. Its feathers shimmered with inner fire. It turned its head slowly, watching him, not afraid, not fear, simply aware. He took a step closer. There were no guards, no fences. The cage door was unlocked. But still, something in him paused. Then, a sound, a whisper, soft as falling leaves. He turned. The wind was rising, threading through the grass, stirring the trees at the garden's edge. and it carried with it a voice, faint, familiar. Not the silver cage, it was the fox's voice, or you will lose what you came for. He looked again at the cage, beautiful, delicate, but not meant to hold something wild and glowing. He took a breath, then slowly he opened the door, not to trap the bird, but to let it choose. The bird blinked at him. For a long, quiet moment nothing happened. Then it fluttered forward, not with alarm but with grace, and landed on his shoulder. Its weight was slight, its warmth like sunlight. No cage, no rope, no force, only trust. He stood still, letting the bird rest there as the wind swirled gently around them. And somewhere far away he thought he heard the fox's soft chuckle. Pleased, the prince turned, and together, he and the golden bird, they stepped beyond the garden gate where the sky was beginning to clear. And though he didn't know what came next, he felt something steady inside him, a quiet compass, for he had listened, and the golden bird had answered. The path through the forest grew soft again, narrow and mossy, with beams of sunlight slipping between tall trees. The golden bird rode quietly on the prince's shoulder, its feathers glowing gently in the shade. They moved without hurry. The prince listened as he always had, to the creak of branches, the hush of the wind, the rhythmic press of his own footsteps on the earth. It was in this stillness that he heard something new, a voice, not wind this time, not fox. It was a whisper, then a cry, faint, tangled in leaves. He followed it, stepping off the path, through low brush and into a grove where 3 great oak trees stood in a circle. At the base of one, leaning against its roots, was a figure, clothes torn, boots scuffed, hair damp with sweat and rain, and the eldest brother. The prince knelt beside him. "You're hurt," he said. The brother looked up, shame flickering behind his eyes. "I thought I could do it alone," he said. "I tried shortcuts, bargains, none of it worked. The forest turned me around." The golden bird fluttered once, then settled. The prince helped his brother to his feet. Together they walked to the next tree, where they found another figure, quieter, slumped beside a broken map and an empty satchel. The middle brother. He looked up slowly. "I thought I knew the way, but nothing followed the maps. The paths changed, and I gave up." The prince offered him water. No blame, no judgment, only stillness. The golden bird made no sound. Then a sound from the third oak, not a person, not a voice, but a hum, low, root deep. The prince placed his hand against the bark. It felt warm, alive. A small door appeared, not one that had been carved, but one the tree had grown itself. Inside, a hollow wide enough to step through. The brothers hesitated, but the prince nodded once, then entered. The inside of the oak was dappled in golden light. Leaves whispered overhead despite no wind. In the centre, resting atop a stone pedestal, sat an acorn, larger than any they'd seen, etched with markings glowing faintly. The golden bird hopped down from the prince's shoulder and tapped the acorn once with its beak. The marking shifted, and then a vision. Not frightening, not overwhelming, just images. A castle, not theirs, crumbling slowly. A king once kind turned cold. A garden once bright, now dull, and at the centre a cage. Empty, waiting. The vision faded. The prince breathed in slowly. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. The bird had not simply taken the apple. It had come with purpose, to guide, to remind, to heal. He turned to his brothers. "We are not done," he said softly, "but we are no longer lost." They stepped out of the oak into the soft light of afternoon. The bird rose, wings outstretched, then circled above them once, waiting. The prince smiled, and together, 3 brothers and a golden guide, they began again. The 3 brothers travelled together now. Their footsteps no longer scattered along different roads, but matched in quiet rhythm, a soft cadence through meadows and wooded trails. The youngest led, the golden bird perched lightly on his shoulder. its feathers catching the light like moving flame. They spoke little, but in their silence something unspoken had softened between them. The eldest no longer tried to walk ahead. The middle no longer doubted each turn, and the youngest, steady as ever, walked with quiet trust in the path unfolding. It was nearing dusk when they reached a tall iron gate, half buried in ivy and shadow. Beyond it, a long-forgotten garden slept beneath a canopy of tangled vines. No one had tended it in years. Yet the moment the bird lifted its wings, the vines near the gate quivered, as if the garden too was waking. The youngest stepped forward. With one gentle push, the gate creaked open. Inside, silence reigned. Statues covered in moss stood along the path. Stone benches lay beneath twisted trees. A fountain sat still, its basin dry, but something about the place felt suspended, not ruined, just waiting. In the garden's centre, a wide circle of earth lay bare, surrounded by flowering bushes that had grown wild and tall. The golden bird fluttered down to the soil. It tapped its beak gently once, then twice, and from the sky a single beam of golden light slipped through the trees and touched the earth. The soil stirred. Something moved beneath it, not fearfully but slowly, like waking from a deep dream. Then rising from the centre of the garden came a tree, not tall but glowing. Its trunk shimmered like amber, its leaves unfurled in silence, and at its heart, nestled where branches met, was a fruit. A single golden apple, brighter than any before. The bird gave a soft cry. The brothers stepped closer, but none reached for the apple, not yet, because just then, from beneath the roots of the new tree, a small doorway appeared, not grand, just forgotten. The youngest knelt beside it. His fingers brushed old wood. It was carved with the symbol of their family crest. Long ago, before the crown, before the garden, before all the rules and riches. The door opened with a hush, and beyond it, a staircase spiraled downward, carved into cool stone. The bird didn't fly away. It perched at the threshold, waiting. The prince looked at his brothers, and though they did not speak, they each stepped forward, not in fear, but in quiet readiness, because some journeys lead not only out into the world, but deeper within. And this garden, it seemed, had one more secret left to share. The stairway beneath the tree spiraled gently, each step worn smooth by time. Cool air drifted upward, carrying the faint scent of earth and something older, like forgotten stone halls and morning rain. The brothers moved slowly, their footsteps hushed. The golden bird flew just ahead, lighting the way without torch or flame. Its feathers glowed soft gold, painting the walls with quiet light. At the bottom they reached a chamber, round, still, carved from the stone itself. In the centre stood a pedestal, simple, unadorned, and on it, resting like a memory, was a second golden feather. Not brilliant like the others, but dimmed, soft, as though it had waited a very long time. The youngest stepped forward. As his fingers brushed the feather, the walls of the chamber began to hum, not loudly, but with a resonance that touched bone and breath. The bird let out a long, low note, and around them the chamber began to bloom, not with flowers, not with vines, but with light. Symbols glowed along the stone, old marks, forgotten language, stories told not with words, but with rhythm. They saw a kingdom long ago broken by greed, a tree that bore golden fruit, a bird who flew across the lands trying to remind the world of gentleness, and 3 hearts meant to restore what had been lost. One who sees, one who seeks, and one who listens. The youngest looked to his brothers. They said nothing, but in their silence something unlocked. A warmth filled the chamber, not heat, but wholeness, as if the space had waited for understanding, not action. The feather on the pedestal lifted slowly into the air, and as it did, the golden bird let out a final cry, not sharp but clear, like the last note of a lullaby. Then the light faded, not into darkness but into calm. The bird settled once more on the youngest shoulder. It did not glow now, but it did not need to. Its purpose had been fulfilled. And when they returned to the garden above, the tree still stood, but now its branches were full. Golden apples, gently swaying in the breeze. The statues had softened, the fountain now sang, and the gate, once forgotten, stood open. The youngest looked once more to the path behind them, and then, without need for words, the brothers turned toward home. But they did not walk as they had before, for something in them and around them had quietly changed, and what was once a quest had become a return. They travelled home as the leaves turned gold, not in haste, not as princes returning from conquest, but as brothers, quiet and changed, walking roads both familiar and new. The golden bird no longer led them. It rested calmly on the youngest's shoulder. Its glow softened now, as though it had passed through seasons of its own, not diminished but settled, like fire turned to warm embers. Villages they passed paused in gentle wonder. Children leaned from doorways, eyes wide. Farmers tipped their hats, sensing something in the air, not grandeur but grace. By the time they reached the castle gates, the sun was low on the horizon. The king stood waiting. His beard had grown whiter in their absence. His shoulders stooped a little more. But when he saw his sons together side by side, he straightened, not with pride, but with quiet relief. "You've returned," he said. The youngest stepped forward. He did not speak of feathers or fruit or ancient roots beneath forgotten gardens. Instead, he offered the golden bird, not in a cage, not restrained, but perched freely on his arm. And the king, seeing it there, lowered his head in reverence. "That is enough," he said. They didn't hold feasts, they did not hang banners, but that night the castle halls were filled with soft candlelight. The scent of fresh bread and the gentle sound of music played not for celebration, but for welcome. The golden bird found its place in the garden once more, not as a prize, but as a guest. It came and went as it pleased, and when it sang, the apple trees bloomed out of season. The brothers walked those gardens often, together now, more often than not, and the youngest, who had once been overlooked, now sat beside his father at the evening meal. Not as a hero, but as himself. The garden flourished, the people thrived, and in quiet ways. Throughout the land, something gentle had begun to return. A way of being, a way of seeing. The kind that lingers in long silences and blooms slowly beneath steady care. Because sometimes the truest magic is not in what is found, but in what is kept alive by patience, kindness, and light. And now, as we leave behind the golden glow of orchards and the quiet return of three brothers, let us drift into another timeless story. A tale of hidden kindness, untold loyalty, and the magic that lives in simplicity. We begin The Goose Girl, a gentle tale of identity, resilience, and the soft strength that blossoms even in silence. In a peaceful kingdom, nestled between gentle hills and wide, winding rivers, there lived a young princess. Her name was Alina. She was not loud or boastful, not one to seek the spotlight. But those who spent time near her noticed the quiet kindness in her hands, the thoughtfulness in her eyes, and the way flowers always seemed to bloom just slightly longer where she had walked. Her mother, the queen, was aging, and one spring morning, with soft light falling through the garden windows, the queen took Alina's hands and spoke gently. "It is time," she said. "A neighbouring kingdom has offered peace, and in that peace a promise. You are to be wed to their prince." There was no command in her voice, only a soft sorrow, the ache of parting and hope woven together. Alina did not cry. Instead, she nodded and preparations began. She was given a handmaid to accompany her, a strong horse with a snow-white mane named Leora, a silk dress that shimmered like morning mist, and last, though few saw it, a small pouch with 3 drops of her mother's blood, caught on cloth and wrapped tight, a charm, whispered the queen, to guide and protect her. When the morning of departure arrived, Alina stood at the edge of the garden, listening to the birds, the breeze, the hush of the world before a journey. She did not look back. Instead, she reached down, patted Leora's side, and climbed into the saddle. The handmaid rode just behind, quiet and observant. For the first few days the road was smooth. They passed fields of blooming clover and gentle brooks, slept beneath the stars, and ate by firelight. Alina was thoughtful, offering to share what she had, always thanking the earth for its gifts. But on the 4th day something shifted. The sky turned overcast, the path narrowed, and the handmaid, once quiet, began to change. She stopped offering help, demanded the best portions of food, took Alina's blanket as her own. Her voice grew sharp, her gaze colder. Alina said little. She gave where she could, held silence where she must. But as the days passed, the handmaid's tone turned from curt to cruel, and then, one morning, just as the kingdom's border crested in the distance, the handmaid stopped her horse and turned to Alina. "Give me your dress," she said, "and your horse, and your name." Alina blinked. "My name?" "You will tell no one who you are," the handmaid said flatly. "From this moment forward, you are nothing. A servant. I will ride ahead, marry the prince, and take your place." The sky above them was heavy with cloud. Leora stamped softly beside her. Alina said nothing, but slowly she removed the dress, folded it, handed it over. Then, barefoot and quiet, she walked behind the handmaid, who now wore silk and pride like a crown, as they crossed into the foreign kingdom. The castle gates rose tall. The prince waited, and the truth was tucked silently into the heart of a girl now thought to be a servant. But the wind whispered, and Leora the horse did not forget. The castle stood proud and wide beneath a sky of pale grey. Its towers reached high, banners waving softly in the breeze, and below courtyards bustled with preparations. The prince's wedding had been announced, and yet something felt quiet. The servants whispered. The prince, kind-eyed and observant, walked the halls with a question behind his smile. He was polite to the bride-to-be, the woman wearing fine silk and using the princess's name, but in his heart he felt a silence he couldn't explain. The girl said little. She did not speak of her homeland. She did not ask about the garden, and she never once looked to the sky where birds flew freely overhead. Still, the wedding day crept closer, and the real princess, Alina, found herself not in the tower, but in the stables, assigned to tend the geese. It was a quiet task, and for that she was grateful. Each morning she would rise before the sun, gather the birds, and walk with them beyond the castle walls to graze among the dewy fields. The geese knew her voice, though it was soft. They followed her steps without command. The castle folk called her simply the Goose Girl. They did not know her name, but some noticed the way the geese responded to her, how the fields bloomed slightly brighter where she walked, how the wind always seemed to soften as she passed. Among those who noticed most was a boy named Conrad. He too worked with the geese, a stable helper, cheerful and curious. At first he tried to speak often. Alina only smiled gently. Over time he spoke less and simply walked beside her. They shared bread, listened to the birds, and when she thought no one was near, she would sometimes whisper to a lock of her hair, braided with a thread of red silk. "Blow, breeze, blow," she would say, "and carry my sorrow far away." And the breeze would stir. Once Conrad caught the words. "Who do you speak to?" he asked softly. Alina only smiled, but something in that smile made him pause, like a secret too kind to disturb. Back in the palace, the prince stood at the window. From his tower he could see the field. He watched the geese gather near the low stone wall, watched the girl in the plain dress walk among them with a grace that made the wildflowers bend. She did not see him, but he saw her, and he wondered, why did her presence soothe the animals? Why did her silence feel more genuine than all the laughter echoing through the ballroom? Why did her eyes look as though they remembered stars he had not yet seen? The prince turned from the window. The day was approaching, but a truth, quiet, buried and blooming, had begun to stir. The morning sun filtered through soft clouds, casting a gentle golden hue across the castle gardens. The geese were already grazing in the far field, and Alina sat quietly on the hillside, her braid resting against her shoulder, the red thread tucked safely within it. The prince returned to that hill the next day, and the next. He never came with guards, never wore his crown. He brought apples sometimes, or bread, or simply his quiet presence, and each day they would sit. Alina, in her soft silence, the prince with his questions tucked between heartbeats. He asked nothing too direct, but in the gentle hush he began to see her more clearly. The way she smiled at the smallest things, a goose flapping its wings, a butterfly resting on her hand. The way she listened to the wind as if it spoke just to her. One day he finally spoke the question that had been resting in his chest. "You seem like someone who remembers things others forget." Alina looked at him. There was no fear in her gaze, only calm. "And what is it?" she asked softly. "You fear has been forgotten." The prince didn't answer, but in that silence something passed between them, a shared understanding, deeper than words. That evening the prince went to his mother, the queen. She was seated in her private study, a place filled with old letters and dried herbs where the fire was always warm and the air smelled faintly of rosemary. He stood for a while before speaking. "There is something wrong," he said, "something hidden." The queen looked up from her stitching, her eyes steady. And he told her of the bride who never spoke of home, of the girl in the fields who seemed more royal than any crown, of the wind that listened, of the silence that begged to be heard. The queen listened with the patience of one who has learned to read the spaces between things. When he finished, she didn't question him. Instead, she said, "Bring her to me." The next morning, as the sky turned soft with dawn, Alina walked the geese through the lower gardens. The prince waited at the gate. "I would ask you to come," he said. "Not as a servant, but as yourself." Alina hesitated. Then slowly, she nodded. Together they walked through the halls, not to the throne room, but to the queen's chamber. The queen sat by the fire. She looked at Alina not with suspicion, but with kindness. "Child," she said gently, "what truth have you carried in silence?" Alina said nothing at first. Then she reached up and untied her braid. The red thread shimmered. She placed it in the queen's palm. And in that quiet room, beneath the hush of history and hearth, the truth was felt, not shouted, not argued, but understood. The red thread lay curled in the queen's palm, soft as silk, still warm from where it had rested, braided into Alina's hair for so many days and nights. The queen turned it gently between her fingers. A shimmer moved through it, faint like moonlight on water. Then a memory, not hers, but Alina's. The charm still carried echoes, her mother's voice, whispering a blessing, a goodbye at the edge of a garden. The weight of the silk gown as it was taken from her shoulders, the ache of walking barefoot behind her own name. The queen closed her eyes, and when she opened them they were filled not with sorrow, but with knowing. She stood, stepped closer, and gently placed a hand on Alina's shoulder. "You do not need to prove yourself," she said. "You already have." That evening the castle was quiet. but change moved softly through its halls. The Queen summoned the prince. Together they invited Alina to speak, not to a court or crowd, but to a circle of trust. She told her story slowly, not every detail, but enough. The charm, the handmaid, the silence she carried, the whispers she gave to the wind and the geese, how their quiet presence helped her stay rooted when everything else had been taken. No anger laced her words, only honesty. When she finished, the Queen sat still for a long while. Then she rose and walked to the tall window that overlooked the orchard. "Truth," she said, "does not need to shout, it only needs to endure." The next morning the handmaid was called to stand before the Queen. She arrived cloaked in silks and pride, expecting praise. But the Queen's eyes were calm and her words were few. "You know what you've done," she said. The girl's voice faltered, and in the quiet that followed, the truth settled around them like dust catching light. She was sent away, not with cruelty, but with a gentle firmness, to live among those who till soil and mend cloth, to learn what it means to be honest and useful. Alina did not ask for punishment, she asked only for peace. And so the castle breathed again. Its walls hummed with a lighter silence. The geese gathered by the fountain that afternoon, and even the wind seemed to sing. The days that followed moved softly like a slow-turning page. The castle no longer felt heavy. The air in its halls was warmer, its courtyards brighter. Even the garden seemed to bloom more fully, not in celebration but in quiet relief, as though the land itself had exhaled. The prince asked Alina to walk with him through the linden grove, no throne between them, no expectations, only two people beneath wide green branches where the wind hummed low and the light dappled through the leaves like blessing. "I do not ask you to wear a crown," he said gently, "only to be who you already are." Alina looked up at him, her eyes full of something both strong and soft. "You already know me," she replied, "even before you knew my name." The prince smiled, and that was how the wedding was planned, not with grandeur but with care. It was held not in the grand stone chapel, but beneath the linden tree where the geese liked to rest. The field was trimmed, the flowers gathered, and a simple garland was woven for Alina. Wild blooms, red thread and a single white feather tucked quietly into her braid. The people came not out of duty, but because they felt something real was unfolding, something gentle and right. The geese gathered near the edge, calm and watchful. The Queen stood proudly, her hands clasped, her eyes reflecting peace. And the prince, when he took Alina's hands, did not speak of riches or rule. He spoke of mornings in the field, of a girl who listened to the wind, of choosing love that whispers rather than shouts. When they were joined, the wind stirred, a breeze low and light, winding through the grass, lifting her veil, stirring the leaves above like a soft applause. No one cheered loudly. There was no need, because everyone felt it, the stillness, the joy, the deep rightness of the moment. Later, as the stars blinked awake, Alina and the prince sat beneath the tree, sharing sweet bread and berries from a wooden plate. She rested her head against his shoulder, and he, after a long silence, said, "I always wondered what the wind was trying to tell me." Alina smiled, eyes closed. "Sometimes," she whispered, "it waits until we are quiet enough to hear." As the linden leaves settle and the gentle vows fade into memory, let us drift onward to another timeless tale. A story of wishes whispered to the sea, of humble beginnings and the tides that test the heart. We turn the page as we begin the story, The Fisherman and His Wife, a quiet parable of longing, gratitude, and the peace that lives just beyond the shore. In a small, creaking hut by the edge of the sea, there lived a fisherman and his wife. They had little, only what the tides gave them. The walls of their cottage were crooked, their fire small, and their meals often plain. Yet the fisherman rose early each morning with steady hands and a heart that did not complain. He loved the sea, not for its riches, but for its rhythm, the way it breathed with the world, in and out, wave after wave. He cast his line into its depths, not out of greed, but with respect, as one might bow to an old friend. His wife, however, often sighed. She would sweep the hearth and glance at the walls with furrowed brow. "If only the roof did not leak," she'd murmur. "If only we had a proper stove, a real bed, just a little more." The fisherman would nod gently. He understood wanting comfort, but he never let it turn to bitterness. One morning the sky was silver with cloud as he rowed out onto the sea. The waves were calm, the air still. He cast his line and waited. Hours passed quietly. Then, a tug. He pulled slowly, expecting a fish like any other. But when he drew the line in, he found not a common catch, but a fish shimmering gold from head to tail. It blinked at him with wide, wise eyes. "Good fisherman," it said in a voice like wind across water. "If you let me go, I shall grant you what your heart most quietly desires." The fisherman, startled but calm, looked into the creature's eyes. He did not ask for gold or castles. He thought of his wife and of the leaking roof and the cracked hearth. He nodded once, gently. "Then go," he said. The fish slipped back into the sea without a splash. The sky above seemed a little clearer, and when the fisherman returned home, the old hut still stood, but the roof no longer leaked. A small fire crackled warmly in a new stone hearth. His wife stared. "What did you do?" she asked, and so he told her. Of the golden fish, of the gentle promise, of the sea that still waited just beyond the sand. She looked at the walls and then quietly said, "If it can fix a roof, perhaps it could give us more." The fisherman said nothing, but outside the sea stirred once more. The next morning arrived soft and grey, the kind of sky that blurred the horizon where sea met air. The fisherman woke early, as always, and tended to the nets outside their now dry cottage. The walls still leaned, the windows were still crooked, but the hearth glowed warmly, and no drip disturbed their sleep. His wife stood at the doorway, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Go back," she said quietly, "to the fish." The fisherman paused. "It has already helped us," he replied. "But it can help more," she said. "Ask for a real house, a proper one, with smooth floors, tall windows, a kitchen with space to breathe." He looked to the sea. It was calm, almost waiting. He did not wish to trouble it, but he also wished for his wife's heart to rest. So he took the small boat and rowed through the morning hush. The sea swelled gently beneath him, silver and wide. When he reached the deeper waters, he called out, not loudly but respectfully. "Golden fish," he said, "are you there?" The surface rippled, and from beneath the quiet waves the golden fish appeared, its eyes calm, its voice low. "What is it you ask?" "My wife," the fisherman began, then paused. "She wishes for a house, not a hut, something warm, solid." The fish blinked once. "So it shall be," it said, and with a swirl of light beneath the water, it was gone. The fisherman turned his boat. The shore, as he approached, looked different. Where the crooked hut once stood, a sturdy cottage now waited, painted white, roof tiled neatly, a garden blooming with herbs and lavender. Inside, the hearth burned brighter, the windows caught the afternoon sun, and his wife stood in the doorway again, no longer with furrowed brow, but wide-eyed. "It worked," she whispered. The fisherman smiled. That night they ate warm soup in wooden bowls and listened to the fire, but the wind outside began to shift, not harshly, just expectantly. And the next morning the wife looked not at the sea, but at the clouds. "If the fish could give us this," she murmured, "imagine what else it could offer." The fisherman looked down at his calloused hands. He said nothing, But far beyond the shore, the sea stirred gently as if listening still. The days passed gently, but the air in the cottage shifted. Though the hearth burned bright and the cupboards were full, the wife's gaze often drifted to the horizon. She would stand at the window, fingertips resting on the glass, eyes tracing the line where the sky touched the sea. "It's beautiful," she would say, "but it's still so small." The fishermen, who had begun to find peace in the simplicity of their days, said little. But one morning, as gulls called softly above the dunes, she turned to him and spoke with calm certainty. "Go back. Ask for a palace, a true place of honor, something fitting." The fisherman hesitated. "We have more than enough," he said gently. She didn't raise her voice, but her silence, long and lingering, wrapped around the room like fog. And so once more he took up the oars and rowed into the waiting sea. The water had darkened, not with storm, but with depth. Still he called out, "Golden fish, if you hear me, I ask again." The waves parted. The fish surfaced slowly, golden light glinting from its scales. "What does the heart seek now?" it asked. "She wishes for a palace," the fisherman said softly, "a home fit for a queen." The fish was silent. Then it spoke as gentle as ever. "So it shall be." The fisherman returned to shore, but the cottage was gone. In its place stood a palace. Towers of pale stone rose above the trees, gardens sprawled with roses and fountains, wide marble steps led to carved doors that opened with a whisper. Inside, everything glowed. The ceilings arched like waves frozen in time. The floors shimmered beneath velvet rugs. Each window framed the sea, as if the palace itself were watching the horizon. His wife stood on a balcony, clothed in silk, her hair gathered in shining pins. She turned when she saw him. "You came back," she said, and for a time they lived among soft light and high ceilings. But the sea was still there, and it listened. Each night, as the fisherman walked alone on the sands, he felt its breath, quiet, patient, and deep. Not angry, not pleased, only present. And above them all the stars blinked slowly, as if remembering something old. The palace walls stood tall, but the air around them had changed. Gone was the hush of simple fires and creaking doors. In its place silence lingered in the high corners, a silence not of peace but of space too large for comfort. The fisherman spent more time by the shore. He would walk barefoot in the morning light, letting the waves lap at his feet. The sea was calm as it had always been, but it no longer felt restful. It felt waiting. Back in the palace, his wife no longer stood at the window. She now sat in grand chairs and gave quiet instructions to servants. She wore gowns stitched with silver thread, her voice softer but not gentler. She rarely smiled, and one evening, without preamble, she turned to him and said, "Go again." He looked at her. "There is nothing more we need," he said. She didn't answer right away. Then, with a distant gaze, she whispered, "But I want more. I want to rule the skies and sea. I want the fish itself to serve me." The fisherman's breath caught. "That is not how the sea works," he said. "Not the fish, not the gift." But her eyes held firm, and so, with a heavy heart, he took the oars once more. The sea was darker now, not violent, but deep with quiet pressure. The wind was still, the horizon blurred. When he reached the centre, he called, "Golden fish, I come once more. I do not wish to ask, but I do not come for me." The sea waited. Then, with barely a ripple, the fish rose. Its eyes, still kind, met his. "There is nothing more to give," it said, "only what is returned." The fisherman bowed his head, and when he lifted it again, the fish was gone. He rowed back slowly, and as he stepped onto the shore, there was no palace, no stone steps, no velvet halls, only the crooked little hut. The fire crackled softly inside. Then his wife sat at the edge of the garden, her hands in her lap. She didn't weep, she simply looked at him, and then out to the sea. And for the first time in many days the wind moved again, softly, without storm. A storm, it seemed, had come and gone, not with thunder, but with silence. The morning that followed was quiet, not the quiet of absence or emptiness, but the kind that settles after a long breath when everything has returned to stillness. The fisherman stepped outside and felt the earth beneath his feet. The sea murmured gently in the distance, its waves brushing the shore like a lullaby. He looked at the crooked little hut. Its roof, patched once again, let in a soft golden light through the edges. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, his wife stirred a pot above the fire, her eyes lowered, her hands steady. She didn't speak when he entered, but she did place a bowl in front of him, warm porridge, a piece of bread, still soft. He sat. The fire crackled. Outside, the gulls circled low, and a breeze played with the edge of the old curtain. "I asked too much," she said finally. The fisherman didn't answer. She looked up. "Do you hate me for it?" He reached across the table and placed his weathered hand over hers. "No," he said, "I think we forgot what we already had." She blinked slowly, and in that still moment, something shifted, not with grand words or dramatic change, but with understanding. They spent that day together, not in silence, but in ease. She swept the floors. He repaired the nets. They gathered herbs by the hillside and watched the sea in the golden hour. And when the sun sank low and the sky turned soft with stars, they lit a small lantern and sat by the water. "I used to think peace was something you earned," she said, her voice barely louder than the tide. He smiled. "Maybe it's something you remember." The waves lapped gently, the wind stirred the lantern flame, and the sea, vast and old and knowing, breathed with them, not with magic or promise, but with presence. The fisherman closed his eyes, not to dream, but to rest, beside the one who had travelled through longing and back again, only to find that what they truly needed was already waiting in the quiet all along. As the linden leaves settle and the gentle vows fade into memory, let us drift onward to another timeless tale. A story of wishes whispered to the sea, of humble beginnings and the tides that test the heart. We turn the page as we begin the story, The Fisherman and His Wife, a quiet parable of longing, gratitude, and the peace that lives just beyond the shore. In a small, creaking hut by the edge of the sea, there lived a fisherman and his wife. They had little, only what the tides gave them. The walls of their cottage were crooked, their fire small, and their meals often plain. Yet the fisherman rose early each morning with steady hands and a heart that did not complain. He loved the sea, not for its riches, but for its rhythm, the way it breathed with the world, in and out, wave after wave. He cast his line into its depths, not out of greed, but with respect, as one might bow to an old friend. His wife, however, often sighed. She would sweep the hearth and glance at the walls with furrowed brow. "If only the roof did not leak," she'd murmur. "If only we had a proper stove, a real bed, just a little more." The fisherman would nod gently. He understood wanting comfort, but he never let it turn to bitterness. One morning the sky was silver with cloud as he rowed out onto the sea. The waves were calm, the air still. He cast his line and waited. Hours passed quietly. Then, a tug. He pulled slowly, expecting a fish like any other. But when he drew the line in, he found not a common catch, but a fish shimmering gold from head to tail. It blinked at him with wide, wise eyes. "Good fisherman," it said in a voice like wind across water. "If you let me go, I shall grant you what your heart most quietly desires." The fisherman, startled but calm, looked into the creature's eyes. He did not ask for gold or castles. He thought of his wife and of the leaking roof and the cracked hearth. He nodded once, gently. "Then go," he said. The fish slipped back into the sea without a splash. The sky above seemed a little clearer, and when the fisherman returned home, the old hut still stood, but the roof no longer leaked. A small fire crackled warmly in a new stone hearth. His wife stared. "What did you do?" she asked, and so he told her. Of the golden fish, of the gentle promise, of the sea that still waited just beyond the sand. She looked at the walls and then quietly said, "If it can fix a roof, perhaps it could give us more." The fisherman said nothing, but outside the sea stirred once more. The next morning arrived soft and grey, the kind of sky that blurred the horizon where sea met air. The fisherman woke early, as always, and tended to the nets outside their now dry cottage. The walls still leaned, the windows were still crooked, but the hearth glowed warmly, and no drip disturbed their sleep. His wife stood at the doorway, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Go back," she said quietly, "to the fish." The fisherman paused. "It has already helped us," he replied. "But it can help more," she said. "Ask for a real house, a proper one, with smooth floors, tall windows, a kitchen with space to breathe." He looked to the sea. It was calm, almost waiting. He did not wish to trouble it, but he also wished for his wife's heart to rest. So he took the small boat and rowed through the morning hush. The sea swelled gently beneath him, silver and wide. When he reached the deeper waters, he called out, not loudly but respectfully. "Golden fish," he said, "are you there?" The surface rippled, and from beneath the quiet waves the golden fish appeared, its eyes calm, its voice low. "What is it you ask?" "My wife," the fisherman began, then paused. "She wishes for a house, not a hut, something warm, solid." The fish blinked once. "So it shall be," it said, and with a swirl of light beneath the water, it was gone. The fisherman turned his boat. The shore, as he approached, looked different. Where the crooked hut once stood, a sturdy cottage now waited, painted white, roof tiled neatly, a garden blooming with herbs and lavender. Inside, the hearth burned brighter, the windows caught the afternoon sun, and his wife stood in the doorway again, no longer with furrowed brow, but wide-eyed. "It worked," she whispered. The fisherman smiled. That night they ate warm soup in wooden bowls and listened to the fire, but the wind outside began to shift, not harshly, just expectantly. And the next morning the wife looked not at the sea, but at the clouds. "If the fish could give us this," she murmured, "imagine what else it could offer." The fisherman looked down at his calloused hands. He said nothing, but far beyond the shore the sea stirred gently as if listening still. The days passed gently, but the air in the cottage shifted. Though the hearth burned bright and the cupboards were full, the wife's gaze often drifted to the horizon. She would stand at the window, fingertips resting on the glass, eyes tracing the line where the sky touched the sea. "It's beautiful," she would say, "but it's still so small." The fisherman, who had begun to find peace in the simplicity of their days, said little. But one morning, as gulls called softly above the dunes, she turned to him and spoke with calm certainty. "Go back. Ask for a palace, a true place of honor, something fitting." The fisherman hesitated. "We have more than enough," he said gently. She didn't raise her voice, but her silence, long and lingering, wrapped around the room like fog. And so once more he took up the oars and rowed into the waiting sea. The water had darkened, not with storm, but with depth. Still he called out, "Golden fish, if you hear me, I ask again." The waves parted. The fish surfaced slowly, golden light glinting from its scales. "What does the heart seek now?" it asked. "She wishes for a palace," the fisherman said softly, "a home fit for a queen." The fish was silent. Then it spoke as gentle as ever. So it shall be. The fisherman returned to shore, but the cottage was gone. In its place stood a palace. Towers of pale stone rose above the trees, gardens sprawled with roses and fountains. Wide marble steps led to carved doors that opened with a whisper. Inside, everything glowed. The ceilings arched like waves frozen in time. The floors shimmered beneath velvet rugs. Each window framed the sea, as if the palace itself were watching the horizon. His wife stood on a balcony, clothed in silk, her hair gathered in shining pins. She turned when she saw him. "You came back," she said, and for a time they lived among soft light and high ceilings. But the sea was still there, and it listened. Each night, as the fisherman walked alone on the sands, he felt its breath, quiet, patient, and deep. Not angry, not pleased, only present. And above them all the stars blinked slowly, as if remembering something old. The palace walls stood tall, but the air around them had changed. Gone was the hush of simple fires and creaking doors. In its place silence lingered in the high corners, a silence not of peace but of space too large for comfort. The fisherman spent more time by the shore. He would walk barefoot in the morning light, letting the waves lap at his feet. The sea was calm as it had always been, but it no longer felt restful. It felt waiting. Back in the palace, his wife no longer stood at the window. She now sat in grand chairs and gave quiet instructions to servants. She wore gowns stitched with silver thread, her voice softer but not gentler. She rarely smiled, and one evening, without preamble, she turned to him and said, "Go again." He looked at her. "There is nothing more we need," he said. She didn't answer right away. Then, with a distant gaze, she whispered, "But I want more. I want to rule the skies and sea. I want the fish itself to serve me." The fisherman's breath caught. "That is not how the sea works," he said. "Not the fish, not the gift." But her eyes held firm, and so, with a heavy heart, he took the oars once more. The sea was darker now, not violent, but deep with quiet pressure. The wind was still, the horizon blurred. When he reached the centre, he called, "Golden fish, I come once more. I do not wish to ask, but I do not come for me." The sea waited. Then, with barely a ripple, the fish rose. Its eyes, still kind, met his. "There is nothing more to give," it said, "only what is returned." The fisherman bowed his head, and when he lifted it again, the fish was gone. He rowed back slowly, and as he stepped onto the shore, there was no palace, no stone steps, no velvet halls, only the crooked little hut. The fire crackled softly inside. Then his wife sat at the edge of the garden, her hands in her lap. She didn't weep, she simply looked at him, and then out to the sea. And for the first time in many days the wind moved again, softly, without storm. A storm, it seemed, had come and gone, not with thunder, but with silence. The morning that followed was quiet, not the quiet of absence or emptiness, but the kind that settles after a long breath when everything has returned to stillness. The fisherman stepped outside and felt the earth beneath his feet. The sea murmured gently in the distance, its waves brushing the shore like a lullaby. He looked at the crooked little hut. Its roof, patched once again, let in a soft golden light through the edges. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, his wife stirred a pot above the fire, her eyes lowered, her hands steady. She didn't speak when he entered, but she did place a bowl in front of him, warm porridge, a piece of bread, still soft. He sat. The fire crackled. Outside, the gulls circled low, and a breeze played with the edge of the old curtain. "I asked too much," she said finally. The fisherman didn't answer. She looked up. "Do you hate me for it?" He reached across the table and placed his weathered hand over hers. "No," he said, "I think we forgot what we already had." She blinked slowly, and in that still moment, something shifted. Not with grand words or dramatic change, but with understanding. They spent that day together, not in silence but in ease. She swept the floors. He repaired the nets. They gathered herbs by the hillside and watched the sea in the golden hour. And when the sun sank low and the sky turned soft with stars, they lit a small lantern and sat by the water. "I used to think peace was something you earned," she said, her voice barely louder than the tide. He smiled. "Maybe it's something you remember." The waves lapped gently, the wind stirred the lantern flame, and the sea, vast and old and knowing, breathed with them, not with magic or promise, but with presence. The fisherman closed his eyes, not to dream, but to rest, beside the one who had travelled through longing and back again, only to find that what they truly needed was already waiting in the quiet all along.